The sun was already high in the sky when Maria walked into the workshop that morning. The place smelled of oil, smoke, and hot iron. It was loud, two hammers striking, wrenches turning, machines humming like restless beasts waiting to be tamed. Maria tied her hair back and pulled her faded blue work overalls tighter. Her hands were rough from years of fixing engines, but her eyes still held a quiet spark of hope. She had worked in many small garages before, fixing cars and bikes to earn her living, but this workshop was different. It was bigger, louder, and full of men who didn't expect her to belong there. Maria didn't care. She had grown up fixing broken radios and bicycles in her small neighborhood, and if she could do that, she could face anything. Across the room, a tall man in a clean white shirt and shiny boots was standing near a heavy machine. His name was Daniel. He was not just an engineer, he was the chief engineer of the factory. Everyone respected him for his knowledge, his confidence, and the way he could solve difficult problems. But Daniel also had a sharp tongue and often made jokes at the expense of others. When he saw Maria walking in, with her tool bag slung over her shoulder, Daniel smirked. "Another helper," he said loudly, so that the other workers laughed. "What can you do with those small hands? Engines are not toys, you know." Maria felt the laughter around her like sharp stones thrown in her path, but she did not flinch. She placed her tool bag on the floor and looked at him with calm eyes. "I can do my work," she said simply. The workers quieted for a moment, surprised at her steady voice. Daniel chuckled and crossed his arms. "All right then," he said with a mocking smile. He pointed at a large engine in the corner of the workshop. It was half disassembled, its parts scattered like puzzle pieces. "If you can fix that engine, I'll marry you." The men around him roared with laughter. To them, it was only a joke, a way to put Maria in her place. They thought the engine was too complicated, and Daniel's words were only meant to embarrass her. But Maria did not laugh. She turned her head slowly toward the machine, studying its broken form as if it were a living thing that had been hurt and left waiting for help. Her heart beat faster, but not from fear. She had always believed that machines could be understood if one listened carefully enough. "Is that a promise?" she asked quietly. The workshop fell silent for a moment. Some workers coughed awkwardly. They had not expected her to answer like that. Daniel raised his eyebrows, amused. "A promise," he repeated. "Of course. If you fix it, I'll marry you. But don't waste your time. That engine has defeated even my best men." Maria nodded once, as if sealing the words inside her heart. She didn't look at him again. Instead, she walked toward the engine and knelt beside it. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of grease and iron. Daniel turned away, still smiling, and the men went back to their work, whispering among themselves. Most of them thought she would give up within an hour. Some felt a little sorry for her, but they didn't say anything. Maria opened her tool bag. She laid out her wrenches, screwdrivers, and a small notebook where she often wrote ideas and notes about machines she worked on. She had no fancy degree, no big titles, and no one to defend her. All she had were her hands, her mind, and her quiet courage. As she began checking the pieces, her memories floated back. She remembered her father's small shed, where she first learned how to repair an old fan. She remembered how neighbors used to bring her broken bicycles and how she would spend hours fixing them. She remembered her mother's smile, proud but tired, as Maria brought home a few coins after repairing radios. Every step of her life had led her here, to this very moment. The workshop buzzed around her, but Maria was lost in her own world. Each bolt she turned, each wire she traced, was a step closer to proving not just to Daniel but to herself that she belonged here. From a distance, Daniel glanced back at her. Something about the way she worked made him pause. He expected her to fumble, to look nervous, but instead, She looked focused, almost serene. He quickly looked away, brushing the thought aside. For Maria, the challenge was more than about engines or marriage. She didn't care for Daniel's laughter or the men's jokes. What she wanted was respect. She wanted to show that her worth was not measured by the color of her skin or the strength of her arms but by the skill of her mind and the dedication of her heart. As the day went on, the workers noticed she hadn't left the engine. She took no long breaks. She didn't complain about the heat or the heavy tools. Instead, she kept working, slowly but carefully, her notebook filling with sketches and notes. By evening, some of the men began to whisper differently. They saw the determination in her eyes and the steady way she moved. Daniel, still confident, laughed with them, but somewhere deep inside, a small spark of curiosity began to grow. Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead and tightened another bolt. She whispered softly to herself, "Engines speak. You just have to listen." And though the road ahead would be long, the seed of her journey had been planted that day. The challenge was set. The promise was made. And Maria was ready to begin. Maria woke up before the sun. Her small room was quiet except for the sound of birds outside. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, staring at her rough hands. They were hands that carried years of hard work, hands that had touched broken machines, heavy tires, rusted bolts, and grease that never fully washed away. For many people, these hands were ordinary. For Maria, they were her pride. They were the proof of how far she had come. Life had not been easy for her. She grew up in a crowded neighborhood where money was always short. Her father worked as a cleaner in a factory, and her mother sold food in the market. They lived in a small house with walls so thin that voices from the street slipped inside every night. But even in those conditions, Maria's heart was strong. She never allowed her surroundings to define her dreams. As a child, Maria was different. While other children played in the streets, she would sit near old radios, fans, and bicycles that people threw away. She loved to open them up, her little fingers moving with curiosity, searching for the problem inside. Her father noticed her strange interest. Instead of scolding her, he encouraged her. He gave her his small toolbox and said, "Machines are like people. They break down, but if you give them care, they work again." Those words stayed with her forever. When Maria was 13, her father passed away. His loss left a deep emptiness in her family. Her mother had to work harder, and Maria too found herself repairing neighbors' bicycles and fans just to earn a little money. People sometimes laughed when they saw a young girl with oil stains on her face, holding a wrench bigger than her hand. But when she fixed their broken items, the laughter changed to surprise. Slowly, she built a name for herself. By the time she was 20, Maria was known in her town as the girl who could fix anything. But even with her growing skill, she often faced walls that were invisible but strong. Workshops refused to hire her, saying it was no place for women. Some even mocked her skin, as if her color had anything to do with her talent. Maria never let those words destroy her spirit. She held on to her dream, believing that every engine she fixed was a step closer to proving herself. Now, standing in the large workshop where Daniel worked, she felt the weight of her journey pressing on her shoulders. Daniel's challenge still echoed in her mind, "If you can fix that engine, I'll marry you." To him, it had been a joke. To her, it was not about marriage. It was about respect. It was about showing that she had a place in this world, no matter what others said. That morning, she returned to the workshop with her small notebook and tools. The engine was waiting, silent and broken, like a puzzle daring her to solve it. Some of the workers glanced at her as she walked in, shaking their heads. They whispered among themselves, betting how long she would last before giving up. Maria ignored their voices. She had learned long ago that the noise of doubt was everywhere, but it only had power if she listened. She opened her notebook and began to sketch the engine's parts. She traced each line carefully, her pencil moving with quiet confidence. As the hours passed, Maria remembered all the times she had been underestimated. She remembered when one workshop owner told her, "You'll never be taken seriously. This world is for men." She remembered when her classmates laughed as she carried a heavy toolbox down the street. She remembered the ache in her mother's voice when she said, "Maria, maybe you should try something easier." But Maria's heart always whispered back, "Don't stop." In the workshop, Daniel occasionally walked by, watching from a distance. He didn't say anything, but a small smile played on his lips. He still believed she would fail. To him, her efforts were only temporary, a storm that would pass, leaving no trace. But Maria's silence was stronger than words. Every bolt she turned, every measurement she checked, was like a stone in the foundation she was building for herself. One worker, an older man named Tomasz, finally approached her. He had been in the workshop for years and had seen many mechanics come and go. He leaned down and said softly, "That engine is not simple. Even the chief himself struggled with it. Are you sure you want to waste your time?" Maria looked up at him and smiled faintly. "If it can be built, it can be fixed. I only need to understand what it is trying to tell me." Tomasz studied her for a moment, then nodded. There was something in her eyes, something unshakable. He left her to her work, but in his heart, a small seed of respect began to grow. By the end of the day, Maria was covered in grease and sweat, but her notebook was filled with pages of notes. She had not yet solved the mystery of the engine, but she was closer than anyone expected. The other workers were surprised she hadn't given up. Some even began to watch her quietly, curiosity replacing laughter. Daniel, however, still smirked. "Let her play," he said to his men. "Engines are not fixed by stubbornness." But Maria's heart whispered again, "Don't stop." She walked home that evening tired but not broken. She placed her tools on the table, lit a small lamp, and studied her notes again. The challenge was big, but so was her determination. As the night grew darker, Maria whispered to herself, "One day, they will see me not as a joke, but as who I truly am." And with that, she closed her notebook, ready for another day of battle, this time not with people, but with steel, bolts, and the silent language of machines. The next morning, Maria reached the workshop earlier than everyone else. The sky was still pale, and the streets were quiet. She wanted time alone with the engine before the noise and chatter of the workers filled the air. When she entered, the big machine stood in the corner like a sleeping giant. Its parts were scattered on the floor: pistons, gears, valves, and pipes. To many, it looked hopeless, like a puzzle missing too many pieces. But to Maria, it was not hopeless, it was simply waiting to be understood. She ran her hand over the cold metal, almost like greeting an old friend. "Let's talk today," she whispered softly, as though the engine could hear her. Maria opened her notebook and reviewed her sketches from the day before. She had traced the main parts, noted where the damage seemed worse, and marked what didn't make sense. She picked up her wrench and carefully loosened a few bolts, setting them aside in neat rows. Unlike the others, who left tools and pieces scattered, Maria worked with quiet order. Soon the workshop began to wake up. Workers came in, their voices filling the air. Some gave her amused looks, still expecting her to give up any day. Others ignored her completely. Daniel walked in last, his shirt clean and his boots shining as always. He glanced at Maria, then at the engine. "Still at it," he said with a smirk. Maria didn't answer. She was too focused on removing a rusted gear. Daniel chuckled and moved on, though a flicker of curiosity crossed his face. Hours passed. Maria's hands grew black with grease, her back ached, but she kept working. She noticed that one section of the engine seemed out of balance. Some pipes were wrongly fitted, and certain bolts were tighter than they should be. It reminded her of the time she had repaired an old truck in her town. The engine had refused to start because one tiny valve was stuck. Everyone thought it was finished, but Maria found the problem after days of patient searching. "Big problems hide in small places," she murmured, remembering her father's words. She checked every corner, every wire, every joint. Whenever she felt doubt creeping in, she tightened her grip on the wrench and reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't just fixing an engine. She was fixing her place in the world. By noon, Tomasz, the older worker, came by again. He leaned on the wall, watching her work. "You don't give up easily," he said. Maria smiled faintly without looking up. "Engines don't like people who give up. If you stay with them long enough, they speak." Tomasz shook his head with a small smile. "Strange way to put it. But maybe you're right." Unlike before, his tone held no mockery, only respect. As the day stretched on, Maria faced her first real obstacle. A large section of the engine was jammed tight. No matter how much she pulled, pushed, or loosened the bolts, it refused to move. Sweat rolled down her face as she tried again and again. Her hands began to hurt, and frustration whispered in her ear, "Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe you can't do this." She dropped her tools for a moment and sat on the floor, breathing hard. The workshop noises faded as she closed her eyes. She saw her mother's tired face, her father's gentle smile, and the many people who had doubted her. If she stopped now, all those voices would win. Maria stood up slowly. She wiped her face and stared at the jammed piece again. Instead of forcing it, she leaned closer and examined it carefully. Then she saw it, one small bolt hidden beneath a layer of grease, almost invisible. That was the lock keeping the whole section stuck. Her lips curved into a small smile. She tightened her wrench, turned the hidden bolt, and at once the jammed piece shifted loose with a metallic sigh. It felt like the engine had finally answered her patience. A few workers nearby had been watching. They were surprised. One of them whispered, "She actually found it." Daniel, standing at his desk, heard the sound too. He turned his head sharply. His eyes narrowed as he saw Maria pulling the heavy piece free. For a brief second, he was impressed, but he quickly hid it behind another laugh. "Lucky guess," he said loudly, though his voice didn't carry the same certainty as before. Maria ignored him. She placed the piece on the ground and began cleaning it carefully. She didn't work for his approval. She worked for herself. By evening, she had made clear progress. Some sections of the engine were neatly arranged, and her notebook had new drawings and notes. Her hands trembled with exhaustion, but her heart felt lighter. The engine was slowly revealing its secrets to her. As she packed her tools, Tomasz approached again. "I've seen many mechanics in my life," he said softly. "But you remind me of your father. Did he ever work in a factory?" Maria's eyes widened a little. "Yes. He was a cleaner. But he loved machines." Tomasz nodded slowly, as though he remembered. Then he said, "Keep going. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong here." Maria's heart warmed at his words. Respect was still rare for her, but it was beginning to grow, one person at a time. She walked home that night tired, her clothes dirty, her body sore, but inside, her spirit was glowing with quiet strength. The challenge was still far from over. The engine was not fixed yet. Daniel still laughed. But Maria had taken the first step. She had shown the machine, and the people around her, that she was not someone who gave up. And in the silence of her small room, with her notebook open before her, she whispered again, "Big problems hide in small places. I'll find them all." Days turned into weeks, and Maria kept returning to the workshop each morning before the others arrived. Her routine became as steady as the beating of her heart: study, sketch, clean, tighten, loosen, listen. The engine was like a book with missing pages, and every day she discovered another line, another clue. But the path was not smooth. Some mornings she would sit in front of the machine for hours without progress. The parts seemed stubborn, refusing to fit, refusing to turn. She would feel the heavy weight of frustration pressing on her shoulders. "Why won't you speak to me?" she whispered once, her voice almost breaking. Other times, she made mistakes. One afternoon, while adjusting a valve, she fitted it backwards without realizing. When she tried to test the section, the whole piece jammed. The other workers laughed loudly, and one of them muttered, "Told you so." Maria felt her cheeks burn. For a moment, she wanted to drop her tools and walk away. But she forced herself to breathe. She remembered her father's words, "Every mistake is a teacher." She took apart the section again, fixed her error, and continued. Even in her struggles, Maria's determination began to change the air in the workshop. Some of the men who had laughed before now grew quiet when they saw her. A few even whispered in low voices, "She's still here? After all this time?" Tomasz, the older worker, sometimes brought her a glass of water or pointed out where she could find spare parts. He never treated her as weak, only as another mechanic. To Maria, his quiet support meant more than words could express. Daniel, however, did not soften. He often walked past, tossing casual remarks. "You know, engines don't fix themselves with patience," he teased one morning. Another time he said, "You'll wear yourself out before you even make it halfway." But behind his sharp tone, Daniel had begun to feel something he didn't want to admit: curiosity. At first, he was certain she would quit. Now, after weeks, she was still there, still pushing forward. He couldn't understand what kept her going. One evening, when most of the men had left, Daniel lingered near his desk, pretending to check papers. But in truth, his eyes were fixed on Maria. She was bent over the engine, her face glowing with sweat, her hands moving carefully. There was no one to impress, no one watching, yet she worked with the same focus, as if the whole world depended on her. Daniel frowned, unsettled by the thought that perhaps she was different from the others he had mocked before. The real test came one Friday afternoon. The manager of the factory announced that the broken engine needed to be inspected soon. "If it doesn't show progress," he said firmly, "we'll scrap it and replace it. Too much time has already been wasted." The words fell like heavy stones on Maria's heart. She knew that if the engine was scrapped, her chance to prove herself would vanish with it. That evening, she sat at her workbench long after the others had gone. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages of her notebook. Every drawing, every note, every detail she had recorded stared back at her. She whispered to herself, "I can't fail now. I've come too far." But doubt was a shadow that crept into her mind. She remembered all the voices from her past, the ones that said she didn't belong, the ones that laughed at her dream. For the first time in weeks, tears filled her eyes. She laid her head on the workbench and let the silence of the workshop surround her. At that moment, Tomasz returned quietly. He had forgotten his jacket and came back to fetch it. When he saw Maria sitting there, he hesitated. Then he walked closer and placed a hand gently on the table. "You remind me of my daughter," he said softly. "She wanted to be a teacher, but people told her it was impossible. She didn't listen. Now she teaches in the city. Do you know why I'm telling you this?" Maria lifted her head slowly, wiping her eyes. "Why?" "Because," Tomasz said firmly, "people's words are wind. They blow past. But your work, that stays. Don't let their wind push you away." Maria's heart steadied. She nodded and whispered, "Thank you." That night, instead of going home, she stayed in the workshop with only a small lamp to guide her. She worked until her hands ached, but her mind was sharper than ever. She traced the path of every pipe, every gear, every line in the engine. And then, as dawn painted the sky, she noticed something she had missed before: a section of the wiring that had been connected wrongly from the very beginning. Her heart leapt. It was small, almost invisible, but it could explain why the engine refused to run. She grabbed her tools and adjusted it carefully. The change was simple, yet it felt like a door opening in the dark. When the other workers arrived that morning, they were surprised to see Maria already standing proudly beside the engine, her notebook clutched in her hand. She was tired, her clothes stained, but her eyes shone with quiet fire. For the first time, even Daniel paused. He didn't laugh. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Maria said nothing. She didn't need to. The engine was beginning to wake, and so was her dream. The next few days in the workshop felt different. The workers no longer looked at Maria with only laughter in their eyes. Some still doubted her, but many now watched her with quiet interest. She had survived longer than anyone expected. She had found mistakes that even trained men had overlooked. Something inside the air had shifted like the hum before a storm. Maria kept her head low, her focus fixed on the engine. She didn't chase attention or praise. Her reward was progress, one bolt, one wire, one piece at a time. One morning, she stood back from the engine with a deep breath. Most of its main sections were now clean, aligned, and fitted properly. The wiring she had discovered earlier had been corrected. The parts that once looked scattered and hopeless were slowly taking the shape of a living machine again. Tomasz approached her quietly. He had grown to admire her, though he rarely said much in front of the others. "It's looking alive again," he said, nodding at the engine. Maria gave a small smile. "It still has a long way to go. But yes, it's waking up." A few workers gathered near, pretending to clean tools while sneaking glances. They couldn't deny it anymore: Maria was doing something real. The engine that had been left to rust was showing signs of life. Daniel, however, was not ready to accept what he saw. He stood with folded arms, his eyes fixed on Maria. Every time she made progress, his pride felt a sting. It was his workshop, his men, his position that gave him authority. And yet here was Maria, a woman with no degree, no title, slowly proving him wrong. At lunch, one of the younger workers whispered to Daniel, "She's actually fixing it, sir. Piece by piece." Daniel gave a sharp look. "Don't be foolish. Anyone can put parts together. Let's see if she can make it run." But deep down, Daniel knew it wasn't just putting parts together. He had struggled with that same engine before, and it had left even him frustrated. The fact that she was moving forward was no small thing. That evening, Maria stayed late again. The workshop grew quiet as one by one the men left. The air was cooler, the hum of the machine softer. Maria wiped her forehead and checked her notes once more. Her mind replayed the promise Daniel had made in front of everyone: "If you can fix that engine, I'll marry you." To the men, it had been a joke. To Daniel, it had been a careless challenge. But to Maria, those words had turned into something bigger. Not about marriage, not even about Daniel himself, but about dignity. If she could fix the engine, she would prove to the world that her hands, her skill, her spirit were enough. As she tightened the last set of bolts that night, her heart filled with quiet pride. She had reached a stage where the engine could soon be tested. She placed her tools aside and whispered, "We are almost there." The next day, excitement buzzed among the workers. Word had spread, Maria was nearly ready to test the engine. Some shook their heads, still doubtful. Others leaned against the walls, curious to see what would happen. Daniel tried to act calm, but his steps were sharper than usual, his voice firmer. He felt like a rope was pulling him between two directions: his pride and his growing respect for Maria. By afternoon, Maria stood before the engine, wiping her hands. She turned to Tomasz and asked softly, "Would you stand with me when I test it?" Tomasz smiled. "Of course. I've been waiting for this moment too." The workers gathered closer, forming a loose circle. Daniel stood at the back, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Maria placed her hand on the ignition lever. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with hope. She whispered under her breath, "Father, guide my hands." She pulled the lever. The engine groaned. It coughed, shuddered, and for a moment, silence filled the air. A few men chuckled, shaking their heads. Daniel smirked faintly, certain it had failed. But then a low rumble echoed through the workshop. The engine shook, its gears turning slowly, unsteady but alive. The noise grew louder, stronger, until the machine that had been silent for months was roaring again like a beast returned from sleep. The workers gasped. Some clapped their hands against their thighs in disbelief. "It's working," one shouted. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand against the warm metal, feeling its vibration under her skin. All her days of struggle, her sleepless nights, her endless patience, it was worth it. Tomasz laughed joyfully and patted her shoulder. "You did it, Maria. You really did it." Daniel did not laugh. He stood frozen, staring at the engine. His heart pounded as he watched the impossible become real. The challenge he had thrown like a careless stone had now returned to him as a heavy truth. The men turned toward Daniel, waiting for his reaction. They remembered his words, his promise. "If you can fix that engine, I'll marry you." Maria, however, did not look at him. She simply closed her notebook and whispered, "Respect. That's all I ever wanted." The engine roared on, and for the first time, the workshop did not laugh at Maria. They looked at her with awe. And Daniel, though silent, felt something he had not felt in years: humility. The sound of the engine filled the workshop like thunder rolling across the sky. For weeks it had been silent, a broken thing gathering dust. Now it roared with life, steady and strong under Maria's careful hands. The workers stood around in awe. Some clapped, some shook their heads in disbelief, and others whispered among themselves. "She really did it," one said softly. "Nobody else could, but she did." Maria stepped back slowly, wiping her greasy hands on her overalls. Her heart was full, but her face remained calm. She didn't need to shout or boast. The engine's voice was louder than anything she could say. Tomasz, with a proud smile, spoke louder than the rest. "You all saw it with your own eyes. The machine works again." And it was Maria who brought it back. All eyes turned toward Daniel. For the first time in the workshop's history, the chief engineer was silent. His arms were still crossed, but his expression had changed. Gone was the mocking smile, gone was the careless laughter. His eyes rested on Maria, filled with a mix of shock, pride, and something he couldn't quite name. The younger workers began to whisper, "What about his promise? He said if she fixed it, he would marry her." Daniel's face tightened. The words he had spoken so easily, so carelessly, now felt heavy. At the time, it had been nothing but a joke to make others laugh. Now, it stood before him as a truth he couldn't run from. Maria, however, didn't even look at him. She bent down to close her notebook, her fingers steady. For her, the promise wasn't the goal. She had done this for her dignity, for her place in the workshop, for her own heart. But the others didn't let it go. "Chief," one worker called out, half teasing, half serious, "you said it yourself. If you fix this engine, I'll marry you." Well, she did. A ripple of laughter spread, though it was different now, lighter, respectful, almost admiring of Maria. But Daniel felt the weight heavier than ever. He finally spoke. His voice was calm but uncertain. "Yes, I said those words." The room grew quiet again. Daniel walked closer to the engine. He placed his hand on its surface, feeling its vibrations. His eyes shifted to Maria, who stood still, her gaze steady as always. "You fixed it," he said slowly. "You did what I thought was impossible. I mocked you, but you proved me wrong." The workers leaned in, curious about what he would say next. Daniel took a deep breath. "I gave my word, even if I spoke it as a joke. And a man's word should mean something." Gasps filled the workshop. Some men exchanged glances, shocked to hear such honesty from the proud engineer. Maria looked at him for the first time that day. Her eyes were calm, not angry, not proud, just steady. "I didn't do this for marriage," she said softly. "I did it because I wanted respect. I wanted to show that I belong here." Her words cut through the air like clear water over stone. The workers nodded, murmuring agreement. They had seen her sweat, her mistakes, her late nights, her triumph. She had earned more than just respect, she had earned their admiration. Daniel swallowed hard. He felt something stirring in his chest, something unfamiliar. Respect. He had spent years as the leader, certain of his superiority, certain that no one could challenge him. Yet Maria had done so, not with pride or arrogance, but with quiet strength. He spoke again, this time with humility. "Maria, I cannot take back what I said. I made a promise in front of everyone. But I will not bind you with it. The choice is yours. You have already won something greater than a joke. You have won this workshop's respect, and mine as well." The men nodded, some even clapped at his words. Maria studied him for a moment. She could see the change in his eyes. The pride was still there, but softened, shaped by humility. She gave a small smile. "Thank you, Daniel. That is all I wanted, to be seen not as a joke, but as who I truly am." The moment was powerful, and everyone felt it. From that day forward, the workshop was no longer the same. The men no longer laughed when Maria walked in. They asked her questions, they sought her advice, and they treated her as one of their own. Tomasz often smiled quietly, proud to have witnessed the change. And Daniel, he found himself thinking of Maria more often than he expected. At first, it was just respect for her skill. But soon, he began to notice her steady smile, her quiet courage, the way she carried herself without fear. What had started as a careless joke had turned into something real, something he couldn't ignore. But Maria did not rush. She kept her focus on her work, her dream, her dignity. She had already proven herself. Anything else, she knew, would come in its own time. The engine roared on, strong and alive, a living reminder of her victory. And in the silence of her small room at night, Maria whispered, "Respect is worth more than gold. And I have earned it." The workshop had changed. What was once a place of noise, laughter, and doubt now hummed with respect and quiet pride. The men who had once mocked Maria now looked to her for guidance, and even Daniel found himself studying her work with a new kind of attention. Maria arrived that morning, her hands still carrying the faint scent of grease, her overalls neatly tied, her eyes steady. She looked at the engine she had revived weeks ago. It now ran smoothly, every gear turning in perfect rhythm, a testament to patience, skill, and determination. Daniel approached her cautiously, as he often did these days. His usual confident stride was replaced with a softer step, one careful not to disturb the air between them. "Maria," he began, "I've been thinking about what happened." Maria looked up at him, waiting. She had learned long ago that words carried less weight than actions. She had seen the proof of her own strength in the engine, in the respect of her co-workers, and in the quiet nods from Tomasz. Daniel continued, "I spoke thoughtlessly before. I laughed at you, I doubted you. But you," he paused, searching for the right words, "you taught me something important. Patience. Skill. Courage. and humility. Maria's lips curved into a small smile. She had never sought his admiration. What mattered was the respect she had earned. "Thank you, Daniel," she said softly. "But I didn't do this for you. I did this for me. I wanted to prove that I could do it. That's all that matters." Daniel nodded, understanding. "I know. And that is why what you did is so remarkable. I have never seen anyone approach a challenge with your combination of focus and calm." He stopped, realizing he was struggling to express feelings he had not confronted before. The men in the workshop worked quietly, but they were watching. They had seen the change in Daniel over the weeks, and they sensed something different between the two of them. Yet no one spoke. The respect in the room was too strong for teasing. Maria turned back to the engine, running smoothly under her careful adjustments. She felt a sense of calm pride. It had not been easy. Days of struggle, frustration, and doubt had tested her spirit, but she had emerged stronger. And now, she realized, the victory was not just about the engine, it was about herself. Daniel stepped closer again, quietly. "I was wrong to speak carelessly before," he said. "I shouldn't have made that promise as a joke. But now, I would like to offer it sincerely. If you ever consider it, I would be honored to." He stopped, unsure how to continue without sounding awkward. Maria finally looked at him fully, her eyes calm and clear. She understood the change in him, how he had grown from pride and laughter into respect and humility. She also understood her own power. She was not someone to be won with words. She was someone who earned her place with effort, courage, and skill. "I appreciate your words, Daniel," she said softly. "And I am glad you see me for who I am. But my life, my choices, are my own. Respect is the foundation for anything else, and that has already been given. I don't need promises to feel accomplished." Daniel paused, then nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "And I admire that about you. Your strength, it inspires everyone here, including me." Maria smiled faintly. She had always believed that real respect and trust could not be demanded, they had to be earned. And she had earned it, not through challenges or promises, but through persistence, patience, and integrity. The engine hummed steadily, a living symbol of her journey. The men in the workshop, including Daniel, quietly returned to their work, leaving Maria to her space. There was no fanfare, no applause, just a deep, shared understanding that something meaningful had occurred. Later that evening, as Maria walked home, she thought about her path. The road had been difficult, filled with doubt and laughter at her expense. But she had never let those moments define her. She realized that true victory was never about proving others wrong, it was about proving to herself that she could rise, no matter the obstacles. Daniel, meanwhile, lingered in the workshop. He stood quietly by the engine, feeling its vibrations through the floor. For the first time, he thought not about authority or pride, but about admiration, respect, and something deeper, a recognition of Maria's heart, courage, and determination. Days passed, and their relationship remained respectful. Daniel learned to trust her skill, to listen to her advice, and to see her as an equal in every sense. And Maria continued to grow, not just as a mechanic, but as a figure of inspiration in the workshop, proving that dedication and strength could transcend all barriers. In the end, it was not a joke, a challenge, or a careless promise that defined their story. It was the quiet courage of a woman who refused to give up, who faced doubt and adversity with patience, intelligence, and resilience. And through her example, even the proudest engineer learned humility and respect. Maria looked at the engine one last time that evening, her hands resting on the smooth metal. She whispered to herself, "I have earned this. I have earned respect. And that is more powerful than any promise." The engine hummed on, steady and strong, echoing the rhythm of Maria's heart, resilient, proud, and free.